Imagine you are existing in a state of absolute, effortless, infinite bliss.
Sounds pretty nice, honestly.
Right. Like perfect peace. No anxiety, no deadlines, no physical pain, no fear of death.
Just total, unconstrained freedom.
Exactly. Just complete freedom. Now, and this is the big question for you today, why on earth would you willingly trade that to be born into a fragile biological body?
Right, where you're forced to pay taxes.
Pay taxes, sit in Monday morning gridlock traffic, experience brutal heartbreak.
It seems like a terrible deal.
It really does. But according to today's source material, the answer to that insane trade-off isn't a mistake. It's actually the secret to the entire universe.
Yeah, it's a massive concept.
It is. So welcome to the deep dive. We are thrilled you're here with us today because, well, we are tackling a perspective that will likely fracture the way you view your daily life.
Completely fracture it.
We're looking at a speculative, incredibly dense philosophical framework from a channel called Terran Journeys. It's an exploration into what they call the metaphysics of conscious evolution.
That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. But our mission for you today is to unpack this framework, examine its gears, and see why it challenges literally our most basic assumptions about science.
And about suffering, too.
Yeah, the mechanics of suffering and really the ultimate purpose of your time here on Earth.
It is a massive undertaking. And just to set the tone right out of the gate, we need to acknowledge the scope of what we're dealing with here.
Oh, for sure.
The source material openly embraces the fact that it is diving into high-octane speculation. I mean, it pushes way past the boundaries of traditional, comfortable science.
Way mass.
But the motivation behind it is actually deeply pragmatic.
Yeah.
The author is searching for a middle ground.
A third option, basically.
Right, an option that rescues us from two very extreme, very exhausting ways of looking at reality.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
On one side, you have, pure meaningless materialism, where the universe is just a cold, dead accident.
And you are essentially just a biological robot.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have this heavy-handed, deterministic creationism.
Where every single stub toe is micromanaged by a supreme being.
Right, like you're being tested for an eternal scorecard.
Uh-huh.
So this text is trying to map a nuanced path right down the center of those two extremes.
I am so ready to pull on this thread because both of those extremes feel suffocating in their own ways.
They really do.
Being a meaningless accident feels bleak, but being a puppet in a pre-written play feels claustrophobic. So to find this middle path, the text starts with a foundational building block.
And this is where we have to abandon the idea of a dead universe entirely.
Yes. The source operates on the concept of panpsychism, which is the idea that everything, down to the deepest, most fundamental level of reality, possesses some inherent experiential quality.
It suggests existence isn't just a process of cold evolution. It's a process of conscious becoming.
But I want to pause right there, because when you say everything has an experiential quality, my cynical brain immediately pictures, like, a rock having an existential crisis.
Right. Are we saying inanimate objects have human emotions?
Yeah, exactly.
That is the most common hurdle people hit with panpsychism. So let's clear that up right away. We are not talking about anthropomorphizing a pebble.
Okay, good.
A rock does not feel anxiety about erosion. What the text is arguing is that the fundamental physical building blocks of the universe, so quarks, electrons, the quantum fields themselves, they possess a rudimentary foundational property of experience.
So just as an electron has a property of mass or charge, it also has a property of subjective interiority.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not a complex narrative consciousness like you or I have, but rather a tiny baseline spark of awareness.
Yes. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. It's more like a pixel on a screen.
Ooh, I like that.
Right? A single pixel doesn't contain the entire plot of a movie. But without the pixel's inherent capacity to emit light, you could never build the complex image of the movie in the first place.
That makes total sense. Whereas materialism argues that you can take entirely dead, non-conscious matter, stack it together in a complex enough way, and suddenly, boom, the lights turn on.
Right. Suddenly you get human consciousness out of nowhere. The source argues that this magical emergence is totally illogical.
Because you can't get something from nothing.
Exactly. Instead, it posits that the lights were always on at a microscopic level.
So the raw material of the universe is already awake.
Yes. And that raw material is constantly seeking to gather more complex experiences. Which brings us to a crucial distinction the text makes.
Between having data and having an experience. Yes.
Between merely possessing data about the world versus actually experiencing the world. And to illustrate this, the author leans on a famous philosophical thought experiment called Mary's Room.
I've heard the name, but I'm not familiar with the actual mechanics of it. How does this prove the value of experience?
Okay, so picture a brilliant scientist named Mary. For her entire life, she has been locked inside a black and white room. She interacts with the world only through a black and white television monitor.
Okay, sounds like a weird sci-fi movie.
It does. Now, Mary is the universe's foremost expert on the neurophysiology of vision.
So she knows everything about how seeing works.
She has learned every single physical fact there is to know about how we see color. She knows the exact wavelength of light that reflects off a ripe tomato.
Right.
She knows exactly how that light enters the human retina, how the optic nerve translates it, which specific neurons fire in the visual cortex to process the color red.
So in a purely materialist, data-driven universe, Mary has acquired 100% of the available information.
That is the materialist assumption, yes.
Yeah.
But here's the crux of the experiment. One day, the door to the black and white room unlocks.
Okay.
Mary steps outside into a vibrant garden, and for the very first time in her life, she looks at a bright red apple.
Oh, wow.
The philosophical question is this: does Mary learn anything new in that moment?
I mean, instinctively, my gut says absolutely yes. Reading a textbook about wavelengths is entirely different from the visceral shock of actually seeing red.
And that intuitive leap you just made is the recognition of what philosophers call qualia.
Quali.
Qualia is the subjective, phenomenal, what is like feeling of an experience.
Mhm.
Mary had all the physical data, but she lacked the qualia.
That is fascinating.
The source uses this to argue that the universe doesn't just want to know its own physics. It wants to feel them.
It wants the qualia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The author pairs this with another famous concept from philosopher Thomas Nagel. He asked, what is it like to be a bat?
Right, because we can map a bat's brain, we can measure the frequency of its sonar, but we can never actually experience the subjective sensation of flying blindly through a dark cave.
Right. Perceiving a moth through echoing sound waves. We can know the math of the bat, but we cannot know the quality of the bat.
That is such a wild distinction to make.
It is. And this is the beating heart of the text's middle ground. The universe is actively engaging in a process of gathering infinite varieties of qualia.
So it's actively participating.
Yes. It brings in the theoretical physicist John Wheeler here, specifically his concept of a participatory universe.
Wheeler was a giant in quantum mechanics, right?
He was. And he proposed that the universe isn't just a static stage waiting for actors to arrive. The active observation, the participation of conscious beings, actually gives reality its concrete structure.
So the universe isn't just passively sitting there. It needs us, or things like us, to actually render the environment.
Exactly.
You know, that reminds me so much of an open-world video game. Think about massive games like Skyrim or Zelda.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. The game developers built this incredible foundational substrate. They coded the physics engine, they determined how gravity behaves, they designed the lighting systems.
But they absolutely did not script your specific playthrough.
Exactly. They drop you, the player, into this sandbox, and they hand over the controls. They want you to use their tools to generate a completely unique, unscripted experience. They want to be surprised by what you do.
That analogy captures the essence of this framework perfectly. And notice the profound relief embedded in that idea.
Relief from what?
Well, if the universe operates like an open-world sandbox designed for experiential data collection, it completely removes the suffocating pressure of a deterministic destiny.
Oh, I see.
Because if you make a mistake in a creationist, micromanaged universe, you have either fundamentally failed a divine test or your mistake was scripted from the beginning, meaning your free will is an illusion.
Which is an incredibly stressful way to live. You're constantly terrified of stepping off the preordained path.
But under the metaphysics of conscious evolution, evolution isn't just a biological imperative to survive and reproduce. Evolution is the universe experimenting with itself.
So it's generating all these different forms of life just to see what happens.
Exactly. The cosmos is generating countless derivative structures, meaning galaxies, ecosystems, biological organisms, specifically to gather unique qualia.
It wants the Mary's Room experience of everything.
Yes. It wants to know what it feels like to be a bat, to be a human, to be a star collapsing into a black hole.
So the goal isn't to reach some flawless utopian finish line where the game just ends and everyone gets a medal. The process of playing the game, the act of becoming, is the entire point.
The universe is infinitely playing around, harvesting subjective experiences across billions of years.
Wow.
But if we accept that gathering qualia is the grand purpose of reality, it forces a massive and somewhat uncomfortable reframing of humanity's role in the cosmos.
Uncomfortable is putting it mildly. I mean, as a species, we have an unbelievable amount of
We
hubris.
really do.
We naturally center ourselves as the main characters of reality. We look at 14 billion years of cosmic expansion, stars exploding, galaxies colliding, and we think, ah, yes. All of this was merely the prologue to create me, a guy sitting in a cubicle, eating a turkey sandwich, and filling out a spreadsheet.
It's hilarious when you put it like that. But the source takes a massive sledgehammer to that anthropocentric worldview.
I would imagine so.
It argues aggressively that the human being is in no way the ultimate endpoint of the universe. We are simply a specific biological species, adapting to a specific environment on a very specific rock at one fleeting point in time.
We're just a phase.
Crucially, we are a transitional phase. We are still evolving. The text asks you to consider what humanity might look like in 5 million years.
I mean, we probably won't even have biological bodies in 5 million years. We might be integrated with silicon or existing as pure energy patterns, or we might be completely extinct and replaced by hyper-intelligent squids.
Any of those are viable in this framework, and this introduces the text's concept of intrinsic strangeness.
Intrinsic strangeness.
Yeah. We treat our human biological filter as the objective baseline for reality. We think having 2 arms, 2 legs, and a brain that processes linear time is normal.
Right. This is all we know.
But the source insists that the fundamental building blocks of the universe have no inherent physical normal. They can configure into absolutely anything. Humanity is not the standard. We are just one highly specific, highly bizarre emanation of these building blocks.
I love how the author illustrates this point because it's so incredibly relatable and funny. They use the 1990s animatronic TV sitcom Dinosaurs.
It's a brilliant metaphor for intrinsic strangeness.
For those who don't remember, this was a Jim Henson production. It operated exactly like a standard 90s family sitcom, complete with the grumpy dad who worked a blue-collar job, the rebellious teenager, the annoying baby yelling, "Not the mama!"
Classic.
It had all the exact same social dynamic as The Cosby Show or Family Matters, except every single character in the universe of the show was a giant anthropomorphic dinosaur wearing a flannel shirt.
The author's point is that if we were to encounter another highly evolved, conscious, social species somewhere in the cosmos, their reality would be as jarring to us as watching that sitcom.
Right. To the dinosaurs in the show, their physical environment, their mating rituals, their social hierarchies were perfectly mundane and normal.
But to an outside observer, it's profoundly strange. The source is pushing us to realize that out there in the universe, there are likely countless civilizations where intelligent creatures exist, but their version of normal is built on a biological structure that would look utterly alien, perhaps even terrifying or comical, to us.
But the text doesn't even stop at our single universe. It turns the dial up to infinity by bringing in the multiverse and the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics.
And it makes a point to note that within the realm of modern quantum physics, discussing the multiverse is not fringe science fiction anymore.
No, it's pretty mainstream now.
It's a highly respected, mathematically sound interpretation of quantum mechanics, the idea that reality branches at every quantum event, creating endless parallel timelines.
So if you overlay the metaphysics of conscious evolution onto a multiverse framework, the volume of intrinsic strangeness becomes paralyzing to think about.
Truly unimaginable.
There must be an unimaginable number of these derivative structures and variations of life. Humanity isn't just one flavor in an ice cream shop. We are one microscopic sprinkle on a sundae the size of a galaxy.
That's a great way to visualize it.
I have to interject here, though, because while that is intellectually fascinating, for a lot of people, this is exactly where the existential dread kicks in.
Oh, absolutely.
I think part of the reason we cling to our hubris, the reason we center ourselves, is driven by a deep cosmic loneliness. We carry this immense narrative burden that we are the universe's only chance to wake up and know itself.
The anxiety of being the only ones.
Yes, the anxiety is that if humanity wipes itself out through nuclear war or climate change, the universe reverts to being a cold, dark, meaningless void forever. We view ourselves as the sole custodians of sentience. If we fail, the universe fails.
The source actively dissects that exact anxiety. And it offers a profound psychological release.
It does.
Yeah, it argues that this desperation is completely unnecessary. The participatory nature of the universe, this grand experiment of gathering qualia, is in no way dependent on the survival of Homo sapiens.
So the cosmos will continue its process of conscious evolution with or without us.
Exactly.
You know, it's weirdly comforting. It's like realizing you don't have to carry the weight of the entire world on your shoulders because the world was spinning long before you got here and will happily keep spinning after you're gone. You can just relax and play your part.
It frees you from the burden of ultimate cosmic responsibility. The source explains that the fundamental substrate of reality, which you can call the universe, or God, or source consciousness, has an inexhaustible capacity to generate these derivative structures.
So it's not strapped for cash, so to speak.
Right. If this substrate were micromanaging the cosmos to ensure that humanity specifically succeeded, it would ruin the open world experiment. It would become deterministic again.
It would ruin the sandbox.
Exactly. By stepping back and allowing humanity to risk failure, to be just one strange emanation among trillions, the universe preserves genuine novelty and free will.
Okay, so human life is just one incredibly weird, highly constrained offshoot in a multiverse of possibilities. We are not the cosmic main character,
Yep.
but this forces a massive question. If we are just one of these endless derivative structures, what exactly is the foundation? What is this fundamental substrate made of?
That's the million-dollar question.
And more importantly, and this is the part that really messes with my head, why did this infinite substrate decide to fragment itself and create all these painful, difficult, heavily constrained physical lives in the first place?
Right, if it didn't have to create us, why bother with all the suffering?
Exactly.
This is where we cross the threshold into the absolute core of the text, and it requires us to look at a philosophical stance called idealism.
Idealism.
Yeah. In our modern culture, we are heavily conditioned by physicalism, the belief that space-time and physical matter are the absolute bedrock of reality, and consciousness is just a weird byproduct that happens when matter gets complex enough.
The meat computer idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Idealism flips that completely upside down. It argues that awareness itself is the absolute fundamental layer of reality. Space, time, and physical matter are derivative. They are generated within and by this foundational awareness.
To make this tangible, the text uses a metaphor that is common in Eastern philosophy but applied here in a very specific way. It compares this fundamental awareness to a vast, infinite ocean.
Yes, the ocean and the waves.
Right. An individual lives these derivative structures, like you, me, the dog down the street, and the dinosaurs in the sitcom. We are the emanations. We are the waves.
It's a brilliant visualization. Think about the mechanics of a wave. The ocean is vast, deep, and relatively formless.
Right.
But as energy moves through it, and as it approaches the constraints of the shoreline, a portion of that water rises up. It takes on a highly specific, individuated form. It now has a boundary.
And it experiences the intense friction of moving against the sand and the wind.
Exactly. For a brief moment, that wave might look at the surrounding water and think, I am separate. I am an individual entity.
But eventually it crests, it crashes, and its water dissolves entirely back into the ocean.
The crucial realization is that the wave was never actually separate from the ocean. It was simply a temporary behavior of the ocean.
And the text doesn't just present this as a neat philosophical poem. It brings in what it considers empirical, experiential data to back this up.
Yes, it points directly to near-death experiences, or NDEs, as profound evidence for this foundational ocean.
The author leans heavily into NDE research here, and what they point out is the staggering, undeniable consistency in the testimony of people who have had these experiences.
We are talking about individuals from wildly different cultures, religious backgrounds, and age groups. People whose brains were clinically inactive, who come back and report the exact same structural narrative about returning to the ocean.
What are the specific commonalities they report?
First, they consistently report a sensation of profound, unimaginable expansion. The boundaries of the wave dissolve.
Wow.
Second, they describe an immersion in an unconditional love that is so total and complete that earthly language fails to describe it.
That seems incredible.
They talk about operating in a space of unconstrained physics. They can move instantly, communicate telepathically, and understand complex, multidimensional information without the friction of a biological brain trying to process it sequentially.
It is a state of absolute frictionless fluidity.
But the most common, and perhaps the most important phrase that nearly every NDE experiencer uses, is it felt like home.
Right. They say this physical world feels like a fuzzy dream compared to the hyper-reality of the other side. But, and this is exactly where my brain starts throwing up error codes, let's really look at this paradox.
Let's do it.
If the other side, this foundational ocean of awareness, is an eternity of unconditional love, if it is effortless, expansive, and feels like our true ultimate home, what possible incentive is there to leave?
It is the ultimate cosmic question.
Seriously, why would this infinite blissful awareness voluntarily choose to fragment itself, squeeze itself into a tiny, fragile biological body, become a little wave, and enter a reality defined by intense friction, vulnerability to disease, brutal boundary protection, and profound suffering?
It sounds insane from our perspective.
If I am floating in a cosmic hot tub of unconditional love, there's zero chance I am volunteering to get out so I can get a root canal, struggle to pay a mortgage, and eventually watch my physical body decay. From the perspective of the human wave, this looks like a terrible masochistic trade-off.
You are echoing the exact friction the author anticipates. From our localized vantage point, deeply embedded within the physical constraints of a mammalian body, choosing to come here looks like an insane risk. It looks like volunteering for torture.
Oh, so what's the answer?
Well, the text provides a highly specific answer to this paradox, and it requires us to shift our perspective from the waves back to the ocean.
Okay, shifting to the ocean perspective.
The incentive for the ocean to become the wave comes down to two specific principles: novelty and no loss.
Let's break those down. Start with no loss. How can there be no loss when human life is practically defined by grief and losing things we love?
Because the grief and the loss are only real within the localized illusion of the physical constraints. From the vantage point of the infinite ocean, there is absolutely zero existential risk.
None at all.
None. If consciousness is fundamental and eternal, then nothing is ever truly created or destroyed. It is only remixed and re-experienced.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
When a person experiences a devastating tragedy on Earth, to the wave, it feels like the end of the world. But the source points out that individuals who experience NDEs during horrific traumatic accidents often report a sudden, jarring detachment.
Like they just step out of the fear.
The moment they cross over, they realize that on a fundamental level, they are completely safe. They realize the trauma was a temporary condition of the physical avatar. The eternal self was never actually threatened.
Okay, so if the ocean knows there is no real danger, it treats physical life sort of like an immersive virtual reality simulation.
That's a perfect modern analogy.
You might get terrified playing a horror VR game, your heart rate might spike, but the moment you take the headset off, you realize you are perfectly safe in your living room the whole time.
Exactly.
But that still leaves the first principle. If there's no risk, what is the actual reward? What is the ocean gaining by putting the headset on and subjecting itself to the horror game?
That is where the principle of novelty comes in. The ocean gains truly novel, highly concentrated experiences. It gains new qualia.
Going back to Mary's room.
Yes, Mary's room. In its natural state, the infinite ocean knows everything, theoretically. It knows perfect peace. It knows unconditional love. But an existence of frictionless, infinite peace is, by definition, static.
There's no contrast.
Right. To know what it feels like to be constrained, to know the specific, sharp sensation of overcoming terror, to feel the specific friction of a human life, the ocean has to put on the constraints.
It has to voluntarily limit its own power to experience the struggle.
Yes. The text aligns beautifully with Buddhist philosophy here, acknowledging that forcing infinite awareness into a highly individuated biological form absolutely guarantees friction. It guarantees what humans call suffering.
Because you're trapped in a body.
You are suddenly inside a body that requires constant caloric intake, needs to regulate its temperature against extreme elements, and is forced to defend its physical boundaries against other localized waves who are also desperately trying to survive. That friction is intense, and it hurts.
The source uses a phrase that really stuck with me. It calls our physical existence the hard work.
The hard work, I love that.
Earth isn't a punishment for original sin, and it's not a random, chaotic mistake. It is the specific, necessary mechanism required to generate unique experiential value. Think about it. You cannot experience the immense, triumphant qualia of courage if you exist in a realm where fear is impossible.
That's a profound point.
You cannot fully experience the profound gratitude of a cold drink of water if you have never been subjected to the physical constraint of thirst. The constraints aren't an obstacle to the purpose of life. The constraints are the purpose.
The suffering and the friction act as the engine of novelty. The ocean wants to acquire the unique, hard-won experiential data that only the wave can provide.
And when you factor in time distortion,
Right. Time is heavily distorted outside of the physical realm. What feels like a grueling 80-year lifetime to the wave might feel like a nanosecond to the ocean.
so dipping into a physical existence to harvest that intense, concentrated data is a highly worthwhile experiment.
It's totally worth it from that perspective.
That reframing is incredibly powerful. It fundamentally changes how you process hardship. When you get fired or your heart gets broken, it's not the universe punishing you. It's the universe utilizing your highly specific set of constraints to learn something entirely new about itself.
It gives meaning to the struggle.
But as much as this framework makes intuitive sense, it brings us to a massive, glaring roadblock in our modern culture. If these near-death experiences offer such consistent, profound clues to the nature of reality, and if this non-local ocean of consciousness is our true home, why does mainstream society, and specifically the established scientific community, reject this so aggressively?
Why is it still considered fringe?
Exactly. Why is it fringe?
That is a vital transition, and the author dedicates a significant portion of the text to addressing this specific cultural resistance. The source offers a very heavy, pointed critique of the current materialist atheist framework.
Okay, let's hear it.
Now, it's crucial to understand that the text is not attacking the scientific method as a tool. The scientific method is arguably our greatest invention. What it is attacking is the unproven philosophical assumption that has hijacked science, the assumption of strict materialism.
Right. Let's look at the logical endgame of strict materialism. If you believe that there is no underlying awareness, that the universe is just dead physical matter blindly bumping into itself, governed by unthinking laws of physics, then human beings are nothing more than biological robots.
We are just wet, carbon-based computers.
And if that is true, then consciousness itself is just an illusion generated by complex brain chemistry. It's a trick your brain plays on you to keep you reproducing.
Which means true free will cannot exist. Every decision you make, every thought you have, every time you feel love for your child is just the inevitable, predetermined result of chemical reactions firing in a chain that stretches all the way back to the Big Bang.
You are just a passenger in a deterministic meat vehicle.
It's a very dark view. The author notes that while a certain intellectual subset of society proudly adopts this stance, claiming it's the only rational view, the ethical and psychological implications of it are incredibly bleak.
It paints a picture of a universe totally devoid of inherent meaning.
Yes, where your subjective experience is just a chemical accident. And yet, despite how deeply depressing that worldview is, there is massive societal and emotional resistance to letting it go and embracing a non-materialist view of consciousness.
I have to ask why. If the alternative is realizing that the universe is alive, that we are connected to an infinite ocean of love, and that our experiences have profound cosmic meaning, why do people fight so desperately to defend the biological robot theory?
It seems counterintuitive.
Why defend a theory that makes you meaningless?
The author provides a fascinating psychological insight here. They suggest it is because human beings have a deep instinctual aversion to consciousness being weird.
Weird how?
Well, we crave neat, tidy, controllable boxes. If consciousness is strictly a neurocorrelate of the physical brain, if your brain secretes consciousness the same way your liver secretes bile, then it is contained. It is manageable.
It dies when the body dies, and that's the end of it.
Exactly. But if you open the door to the idea that awareness might have non-local properties, or that it exists independently of space-time, or that it survives physical death, you are pushing people into deeply uncomfortable, uncharted terrain.
Because it shatters the illusion of control.
Completely.
The text actually points out that when confronted with phenomena like telepathy or NDEs, hardcore materialists won't just say, that's interesting data. They will have a visceral emotional reaction.
They get angry.
They push back and say, get that away from me. I refuse to engage with that. Because if consciousness is fundamental and unbounded, it means the universe is vastly more complex, mysterious, and perhaps demanding of our moral attention than we bargained for.
It destroys the neat little materialistic box. And this deep-seated discomfort heavily influences what we consider valid scientific methodology today.
How so?
The source makes a highly compelling argument about the limits of how we currently practice science. Right now, the absolute gold standard of science is the double-blind, placebo-controlled experiment.
Sure, which is great.
And to be clear, that is a brilliant, entirely necessary tool for determining the efficacy of a new antibiotic, or calculating the stress tolerance of a new aerospace alloy.
It's great for measuring physical stuff.
Exactly. But the author argues that you cannot force the entirety of reality, especially the subjective realm of consciousness, into a double-blind, placebo-controlled experiment.
And this is where the text brings up veridical near-death experiences. For you listening, we need to define this because it is the ultimate lich in the materialist matrix.
It really is.
A standard NDE could, theoretically, be dismissed as a hallucination, a DMT dump in a dying brain. But a veridical NDE is when a person whose brain is entirely flatlined, whose heart has completely stopped, and whose eyes are taped shut, reports verifiable information about the physical world that they could not possibly have known through their biological senses.
Yes. We are talking about highly documented medical cases.
Right.
A patient flatlines, they are resuscitated, and they accurately describe floating above their body.
They can repeat verbatim the conversations the surgical team was having down the hall.
Or they can identify a specific serial number hidden on the top of a surgical lamp that is completely invisible from the operating table.
Which is insane.
They report objective, verifiable data obtained while their biological sensory apparatus was completely offline.
Which should be the most exciting scientific discovery in human history. But because our current materialist paradigm cannot mathematically model how a non-local consciousness can perceive a serial number without a physical eyeball, the collective response of the scientific community is to just put their fingers in their ears and ignore the data.
Sad, but true.
Which forces me to ask, if we are actively ignoring highly documented, verifiable phenomena simply because it doesn't fit our current mathematical models, are we actually practicing science anymore, or are we just acting like a religious cult defending its dogma?
The author suggests it is less about conscious suppression and more about a biological imperative for social coherence. They use the phrase social lubrication, which is one of the most penetrating sociological points in the text.
Social lubrication.
Yeah. Human beings are evolved primates. We have a deep, survival-based evolutionary incentive to agree with the group. In the ancestral environment, if you disagreed with the tribe and got cast out, you died.
Right.
Today, the dominant intellectual tribe operates entirely on a materialist framework.
So stepping outside of that paradigm isn't just an intellectual risk. It triggers a primal biological fear of exile.
Precisely. If you are a tenured neuroscientist and you publish a paper suggesting that consciousness might survive biological death based on vertical NDE data, you risk losing your funding, your peer respect, and your career.
It isolates you.
It goes entirely against our biological imperative to maintain social coherence for the sake of safety and productivity. The author points out that it is infinitely easier, from a survival and career standpoint, to just nod along and agree that we are all biological robots, even if the data is screaming that the model is incomplete.
It's the sheer pain of being the outlier. But the text is challenging us to be braver than our biology. It asserts that navigating the true experiential nature of reality, the realm of non-local awareness and qualia, is not going to be solved just by building a bigger particle collider or writing a better math equation.
No, it's not.
It is going to remain messy, subjective, and deeply uncomfortable for a very long time. It requires profound philosophical courage to sit with a universe that doesn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet.
So if we assume you are willing to summon that courage, if we accept that the universe is this massive, mysterious, emotionally demanding process of conscious evolution, a vast ocean of awareness fragmenting itself into waves to gather novel experiences through the friction of physical constraints, where is it all going?
Yeah, what's the destination?
Is it just endless, aimless churning? Is the universe just generating random suffering for the sake of novelty forever? Or is this massive experiment actually moving toward a specific, unified destination?
This is where the text pivots from metaphysics to actual meaning, and it makes a claim that the author openly admits is going to sound incredibly cliché.
Very cliché.
They know it might make a cynical modern listener roll their eyes, but they stick to their guns because it is the logical conclusion of the framework. The text claims that the entire evolutionary process of the universe, despite all of its apparent randomness and extreme violence, is magnetically pulled toward one inevitable outcome, and that is love.
And as the author notes, if the word love carries too much cultural baggage for you, you can substitute it with words like ecstasy, profound bliss, euphoria, or a state of absolute deep knowing.
But let's grapple with the concept of love. It seems like a massive contradiction.
It really does. How do you look at nature, a system defined by brutal, extreme violence and boundary protection, where creatures literally have to tear each other apart and consume their flesh just to survive another day, and conclude that this system is magnetically pulled toward love?
It sounds like naive, wishful thinking.
It does, until you understand the mechanics of how the ocean operates. The text argues that this pull toward love is not based on morality, it's based on the inevitability of recognition.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Let's track the evolutionary path of a derivative structure. In its early stages, a biological organism is hyper-focused on boundary protection. It has to be, because the physical constraints are lethal.
Eat or be eaten.
Right. But if a species survives long enough, if it continues to evolve and its cognition expands, it will eventually see through the illusion of the physical boundaries.
Wakes up.
It will eventually, inevitably, recognize the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. It will realize that the rival wave it has been fighting so desperately is made of the exact same water.
I want to use a human development analogy here because it grounds this perfectly. Think about how a human being matures. If you observe a group of toddlers, their behavior is highly localized and selfish.
Definitely.
A toddler might viciously bite another child over a plastic toy. In that moment, the toddler is operating purely on boundary protection and resource hoarding. The toy is their entire universe, and the other child is a fundamental threat.
Right, they lack perspective.
But as that child's brain develops, as they mature into a healthy adult, their cognitive horizon expands. They develop a theory of mind. They realize that cooperation, empathy, and interconnectedness actually yield a vastly richer, more secure, and more joyful existence. The shift from violence to empathy isn't just a moral choice. It's a sign of higher evolutionary intelligence.
Take that a step further and apply it to an entire civilization. The source draws a brilliant, almost physical parallel here. It suggests that discovering this interconnected, non-local consciousness is as mathematically inevitable for an advanced species as discovering the laws of gravity or electromagnetism.
So it's baked into the physics of the universe.
Exactly. Early in your species evolution, mapping out local gravity so you don't fall off a cliff is your absolute top priority. But once you master basic survival, your exploration must eventually turn inward to the metaphysical laws. You have to discover the ocean. It is a fundamental property of the universe, and an advanced intellect will inevitably uncover it.
And this inevitability completely rewrites how we should think about advanced extraterrestrial life. We have been so deeply conditioned by Hollywood movies like Independence Day or War of the Worlds to assume that if highly intelligent, technologically superior aliens exist, they're going to arrive in massive dreadnoughts to conquer our planet, enslave humanity, and strip mine our oceans.
The author argues that this sci-fi trope is nothing more than a psychological projection of our own lower-level consciousness. It's us projecting our current violent resource-hoarding stage of evolution onto the stars.
That makes so much sense.
The text asserts that if a species is truly advanced enough to manipulate space-time and travel across the galaxy, they have by necessity survived long enough to recognize the fundamental interconnectedness of the universe. They have already discovered the ocean.
Right, because a species simply cannot survive long enough to invent interstellar travel if they are still behaving like sociopathic toddlers. They would have annihilated themselves with their own technology long before they ever built a warp drive.
Exactly. Furthermore, a civilization operating at that level of physics would almost certainly be entirely self-sustaining. If you can manipulate matter at the quantum level, you can synthesize any element you need. You don't need to fly light years across the galaxy to steal Earth's water or iron.
So they wouldn't be conquerors.
No, they have no incentive to act as galactic conquerors. The source suggests that instead of conquerors, they would act more like galactic zoologists.
I love that concept. Galactic zoologists. What does that actually look like in practice?
It looks very much like the Prime Directive from Star Trek. They would have a strict non-interference policy. Because they understand the metaphysics of conscious evolution, they understand that the intense friction and suffering happening on a developing planet like Earth are not mistakes.
It's the hard work.
It is a natural, necessary evolutionary process. They wouldn't heavy-handedly intervene to stop our wars or cure our diseases because they know that overcoming that specific friction is exactly how our species is gathering novel qualia.
It's the crucible.
It is the necessary crucible we must pass through to eventually evolve toward that realization of love and unity. They are simply observing the messy, beautiful process of nature playing itself out.
It creates this beautiful, almost dizzying cosmic paradox. On the one hand, you have a foundational universe based on randomness, generating incredibly intense physical suffering and fierce boundary protection. Yet simultaneously, that exact same system is magnetically drawn toward perfect unity and love.
It's beautiful tension.
But the key is that it is experiencing this realization from the inside out. It is the wave, right in the midst of its turbulent, terrifying crash upon the shore, suddenly waking up and recognizing with profound relief that it is the ocean.
It is the universe waking up and knowing itself from within its own constraints. It is a breathtaking scope. We are talking about a cosmic respiration spanning billions of years, playing out across multiverses, moving from violent, individuated differentiation slowly back to unified, frictionless bliss.
Okay, this is an incredibly vast, awe-inspiring perspective. We are talking about quantum multiverses, infinite oceans of consciousness, and advanced alien zoologists. But I want to bring this crashing all the way back down to Earth.
Grounded a bit.
Yes, because for you listening while folding laundry or commuting to a job you hate or worrying about how you're going to pay rent next week, high-level metaphysics can feel like useless intellectual navel-gazing. If knowing you are the ocean doesn't actually change how you operate on a Tuesday morning, what's the point?
The author anticipates this perfectly, and this is where the text provides its most impactful practical takeaways. Bringing this grand philosophical framework down into your daily psychology completely rewrites your operational software.
That sounds promising.
The first and arguably most profound shift is the complete release of the victim narrative.
Oh, this is massive. I think almost all of us, at some level, harbor a voice in our heads that insists the world is fundamentally against us.
And that is a logical reaction if you are deeply embedded in the strict materialist mindset. If you truly believe you are just a highly vulnerable biological robot in a cold, empty, apathetic universe, then every single setback feels like a catastrophic existential threat.
It feels like you're under attack.
It feels like you, this tiny isolated wave, are fighting an unwinnable war against a massive oppressive reality. But if you deeply internalize the metaphysics of conscious evolution, you realize the universe isn't a cold, empty place conspiring against your happiness.
The suffering isn't fundamental. It is a constraint, yes. It is highly uncomfortable friction. But it is not a permanent condemnation, and it is not a sign that you are failing at life.
Right.
The source says it is incredibly relieving to realize this because it gives you permission to just relax into the constraints of your life. The blaring red alert survival alarms going off in our primitive monkey brains, the ones that scream that a bad performance review at work or a rejection text is a literal life or death scenario, we can finally recognize that those alarms are false.
They're just evolutionary artifacts.
Exactly, not the ultimate truth of our reality.
That realization alone can lower your baseline daily anxiety immensely. But it also radically shifts how you observe and interact with other people.
This is where the empathy comes in.
Yes. When you walk around the grocery store or when you're driving on the highway, you stop seeing other humans merely as competitors for resources or threats to your ego or annoying obstacles in your way. You start seeing them as fellow emanations from the exact same deep substrate.
They are just other waves on the same ocean.
All dealing with the intense, blinding friction of their own physical constraints and all ultimately being pulled toward that same eventual interconnectedness.
It naturally, effortlessly generates deep empathy. You see the angry guy aggressively cutting you off in traffic. Instead of just projecting pure hatred back at him, your expanded cognition allows you to recognize that he is deeply caught in the fierce, animalistic boundary protection phase of his own evolution.
He's operating from fear.
He is suffering under his own constraints. You don't have to excuse his bad behavior, but you don't have to absorb his localized suffering into your own experience.
This framework also takes a sharp, highly critical aim at our modern societal metrics for success and failure. The text notes that much of our culture's obsessive drive for the endless accumulation of wealth, what it describes as a nearly sociopathic need for billions of dollars, is based on a profound metaphysical illusion.
It's all about control.
It is driven by the false premise that if we can just acquire enough material resources, we can perfectly control all the variables of our physical existence, insulate ourselves completely, and banish the friction of life forever.
Which is, of course, entirely impossible. A billionaire still gets sick, still experiences heartbreak, and still dies. But we internalize this materialist narrative so deeply into our self-worth, it completely ignores the massive role of randomness and cosmic luck.
We take it all so personally.
If we succeed and make $1 million, our localized ego inflates and says, I am a genius, I conquered the physical world, I am superior. If we fail, go bankrupt, or lose our job, our ego collapses and says, I am fundamentally worthless, the universe defeated me.
But from the vast perspective of the infinite ocean, the accumulation of localized physical wealth is completely, hilariously meaningless. The ocean does not care about your stock portfolio or your job title.
What does it care about?
The ocean cares about experience. The ultimate, deeply freeing takeaway here is that the value of a human life is not measured by extreme scientific productivity or massive economic accumulation.
So what is a valuable life?
The text explicitly states that a life spent quietly moving through the world, perhaps just playing music for a few people, or tending a garden, or simply being a kind neighbor, is an entirely valid, profoundly valuable existence.
Because that life is successfully gathering novel qualia. It is richly experiencing the world. The source emphasizes that what truly matters, the highest possible achievement, is simply presence.
Just being present.
It is the act of feeling the warm sun on your skin, practicing simple gratitude for a glass of water, and actively shedding all the projected self-hatred and anxiety that our confused materialist society dumps on us. You do not have to hustle to earn your value in this universe. Your mere existence as a conscious, experiencing being is intrinsically, fundamentally, and eternally valuable to the cosmos.
Knowledge is most valuable when it is deeply understood and applied. By actively viewing your daily life as a highly localized, specialized experiment designed to gather unique qualia for a much larger living substrate, the stakes of your daily grind completely transform.
It lowers the stakes completely.
Your failures, your embarrassments, your stumbles, they stop being personal, eternal condemnations. They simply become course corrections and valuable data points in a universe where there's absolute zero risk of eternal loss. You are an integral part of an infinite, glorious process of becoming.
So let's take a breath and recap the incredible, mind-bending journey we've just been on. We started by dismantling the claustrophobic idea of a dead, mechanical universe, replacing it with the profound concept of panpsychism, the radical notion that raw experience itself is the fundamental building block of all reality.
Right.
We explored the bizarre, intrinsic strangeness of our physical existence, realizing that humanity isn't the main character, but just one wild, constrained variation in an endless multiverse of possibilities.
We dove deep into the profound mystery of idealism and near-death experiences. We used the metaphor of the infinite ocean and a temporary wave to understand the ultimate paradox why an eternal consciousness would voluntarily subject itself to the painful constraints of a physical body.
All for the sake of generating novelty and acquiring unique experiential data.
We heavily critiqued the blind spots and the social lubrication of strict materialism, acknowledging the profound philosophical courage it takes to explore the reality of non-local consciousness.
We looked at the inevitable evolutionary gravity of love, realizing that any surviving, advancing species must eventually recognize its fundamental interconnectedness. And finally, we brought all of this cosmic theory crashing back down to Earth, seeing how this perspective radically alters our daily lives.
It changes everything.
It allows us to release the victim narrative, live with deeper empathy, redefine success, and experience a profound release from the anxieties of our animalistic survival instincts.
It is a complete paradigm shift. It is a philosophy that transforms the mundane friction of daily life into something miraculous. And I want to leave you with a final, highly practical thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Okay, let's hear it.
The next time you find yourself deeply, acutely frustrated by a mundane, earthly constraint, maybe you are stuck in endless gridlock traffic on your commute.
Right.
Maybe you're dealing with a petty, exhausting disagreement with a neighbor, or you're facing a sudden, frustrating failure at work. I want you to pause, take a breath, and ask yourself a question.
What's the question they should ask?
Ask yourself this. If you were the vast, unconstrained, infinite ocean of awareness existing in an eternity of effortless, frictionless, predictable bliss, wouldn't you find this exact, tiny, highly constrained moment of friction utterly fascinating?
Oh, wow.
What if your specific, localized frustration in this very second is exactly the novel data the universe came here to collect?
What if the traffic jam isn't keeping you from your purpose, but the traffic jam is the purpose? That is a thought that will fundamentally rewire how you experience your week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the physical reality around you. Keep looking for the ocean hidden within the waves. And whatever you do, keep exploring the weird, wonderful, infinite boundaries of your own conscious experience.